So continuing on the theme that Cummings is now coming out with his kind of strategically selected and released and published evidence that he feels secure now, confident he can publish about the congenital liar Boris Johnson. This is part B of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel being broadcast on Saturday, the 24th of April 2021, and we are looking at the revelations. Well, revelations is not the actual term or concept or description, because this is something that they are admitting to knowing, which we had all along known, and we had confidently said that that is what was happening. That Johnson is unfit, Johnson is a breaker of rules, a defier of rules, as was, of course, Cummings. So why is it that these so-called mainstream, it's a disgrace to call them mainstream, because they're part of the lying. They're part of the lying streams. The Times is part of the lying streams, and we shall come to a kind of Michael Gove plantation or planting addendum here. When the Times says that Boris Johnson is unethical and foolish, I mean, it actually means all the other adjectives that could be kind of put between those two words. Of course he's unethical. Of course he's foolish, but he's also criminally negligent. And he, meaning Boris Johnson, is also criminally contemptuous of people who have no known wrongdoings on their parts in the context of his contempt for people. If we have contempt for Boris Johnson, our contempt would be based entirely on his behavior, contemptuous behavior, contemptible behavior. But his contempt is like congenital contempt, as the recently retired French ambassador to the UK has told the Times. Now, our empirical knowledge of British political post holders and political organizations' cabals is far shorter than the actual length of time over which criminals have held office in the name of government. So, using the so far published and publicly accessible evidence, indication, and witnesses about the last, say, 500 years, it is quite possible to see that the way Boris Johnson has been described by Cummings is a rare kind of description. Rare in the sense that not the majority of the holders of the same post have same post, whether it's called number 10 or something else, before Cromwell or whatever. The evidence shows that whatever the reason, no other holder of that post, so-called prime minister, we say so-called for obvious reasons. If you look at the context and the contents of what we say, that is so-called because it's never a truthful kind of description of what goes on. And Johnson, unlike any other holder of the office, let's say for the last 200 years, and we say that based on the accessible, publicly accessible evidence. There may be still evidence that is not publicly accessible and available to the public. So we say that with that caveat, that condition. Now, for the last 200 years, as measured and as accessed by available public published comments and descriptions, no other holder of that post in the last 200 years has behaved with the corrupt contempt and criminality. Now, of course, people may rush to say, you are forgetting David Cameron. Of course, David Cameron comes very close, but not in the appearance that he had during the years that he was in there. I mean, he was in there, of course, as directly resulting from the corrupt criminal complicity by the Lib Dums, D-U-M-B-S, Lib Dums, as fronted by the crook, sick, Clegg. So these are the people that are sick, unfit, unethical, and stupid. So why are we saying that this is an admission by the Times, not a revelation? Because we say it for years on our campaign. I started publishing fact-based, not kind of hypothetical, fact-based comments in English language outlets, say about 2007. And those included some outlets that are not, quote, internationally known, but the outlets in Oxford, for example, because some of the references that had been made in the previous pieces that I was denouncing and dissecting had been made by outlets based in Oxford. And I started by saying that Boris Johnson, I started by saying in 2007, that was the year before the election to the so-called mayor of London, in the name of London, at the expense of London. I started by saying that Johnson was unfit. Now that was 2007. And here is Cummings saying in April 2021, so it's more than 13 years ago that I said that Boris Johnson was unfit for office, public office. I didn't forget when I said, I didn't overlook when I said that. I didn't overlook the fact that he wanted that very much. That meaning to use Diana, contextually use Diana's language, the top job. I mean, Diana said to Martin Bashir in that interview about Brian, also known as Charles, also known as the eldest son of Brenda, the so-called monarch. And here is a point, here is a disclaimer about the use of so-called. So-called is used here in this program and in this campaign, by this campaign and by this movement, to denote and connote and indicate our total kind of rejection of the propaganda peddled for the post or the post holder. And we reject that not because we don't recognize the universal human rights of people to be, quote, ambitious, or to claim to be holding positions that they do. We say so-called because in the context of the relationship of these posts and post holders to the claimed provision of service to the public, to the community, to the world, we look at the evidence available and we say that so-called is necessary because there is no evidence, there is not enough evidence to justify the unconditional use of the word, let's say, monarch. Because as we have explained before and as the facts justify, nobody is born, really, nobody is born a superior person to another person, another human being. And the monarchy and the royalty is the most corrupt, institutional, racist vehicle and tag and declaration that says that human beings are not born equal. That's the reason why we say so-called. Well, that's the main reason why we say the so-called monarchy. Secondly, on the evidence of the behavior, publicly available evidence of the behavior so far of the now 96-year-old Brenda, also known as Queen Elizabeth II, she has not been prevented by anyone, so far as is known, from condemning racism and distancing herself from racism. And yet she has not condemned racism. She is 96 years old. Give and take 1 year or 1 day or 1 week, whatever, in the registration or whatever. But the point is, she is nearly 100 years old. And she has been in that post or throne for decades. Decades that have witnessed massacres, mass murders and mass violations and rapes and hunger and starvation, all caused by, the ones that are caused by racism and imperialism. And she has not issued one statement in one annual speech, one Christmas do, denouncing racism, denouncing imperialism, denouncing white supremacy. So we say so-called monarch. Now, this one, Johnson, we say the Gove addendum because the Times is owned by the dirty digger, Rupert Murdoch. Now, one note about dirty digger in comparison with Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell was known as a crook while he was still alive before his death in the sea. He was known as a crook, fraudster, and criminal. And the maximum or the nearest to the truth, known truth about him, that Private Eye magazine came to us to call him Captain Bob and that kind of thing that didn't damage his real image or reputation, and they didn't publish the evidence. And this is where the Paul Foot Award needs to be updated on. Paul Foot was an employee of the Maxwell-owned Mirror, and then he left. But whatever he did after leaving the Mirror, he didn't publish anything about Maxwell that I can recall. Now, if there is anyone watching this knows that my fact is not accurate, they're welcome to send a direct message by citing the actual evidence, any published, acceptable, really published item or items. But my kind of recollections are exceptional because I read the papers every day, and I have been reading the papers for as long as I have been reading newspapers. So, and I knew Paul Foot not as a friend but as an acquaintance, and I observed his behavior alongside Jonathan Aitken and others while we were taking part in a campaign against the Labour Callaghan government, deporting two Americans. One is Philip A.G., who was a CIA man who disclosed the details of CIA's operations and agenda and criminality inside the company. That was the first book that anyone had written about the CIA. So Marlene Rees, as the Home Secretary, deported or was deporting Philip A.G. And he was also deporting Mark Hosenball. Hosenball is spelled Hosenball. Mark Hosenball was a New York-based journalist, but he was in the UK for a while. So there was a campaign by the usual suspects, let's say those people who wanted to oppose the deportations on the grounds that they were journalists and free speech and all the other things. So Jonathan Aitken was one of the persons campaigning, as was Paul Foot. And this was the last half of the 1970s. And this was, of course, during the period of the Callaghan-fronted, the racist Callaghan-fronted Labour government before Callaghan let in Margaret Thatcher. So Paul Foot, being overstated as a campaigning journalist by this operation of this Paul Foot Award, wasn't publishing anything about Maxwell. Well, anything that he published or said after Maxwell died is not the same thing as him publishing the stuff when Maxwell was still alive. So we say that Paul Foot is overrated, overstated, and his image that the award, the existence of this award, I think run by the private lie and the Guardian to an extent, is not justified by the evidence of his behavior. I was contacted by Paul Foot. I didn't contact him, but he contacted me sometime in 1976. And there was a piece. He was editing the Socialist Worker, the weekly. And the item that they published about my work ongoing at the time against racism contained a misspelling of my name. But Paul Foot was another Fleet Street journalist, and he was a racist. Because when I visited Fleet Street almost daily, because Fleet Street had still lots of outlets, and I had to visit Fleet Street and Charing Cross to buy the newspapers. Most of the newspapers I bought weren't available in Tower Hamlets or in East London magazines, and I went to Fleet Street almost daily, Chancery Lane, Holborn, High Holborn, Kingsway, and of course Charing Cross, Embankment, Charing Cross. And one day I was walking. I walked most of the times when I went to those places. I was walking towards the Strand, and I was outside where the Reuters news agency used to be, almost opposite the offices of the Daily Telegraph at the time. Now it's Borisgraph. And the Telegraph was still there, situated in Fleet Street. So I saw him. I was going one way and he was coming the other way. So I recognized him and I said, hello, as you would do to somebody you know from various meetings. And Paul Foote committed a racist crime by pretending that he didn't recognize me. Now, how is it that as a human being, he didn't recognize me, but I recognized him from the same set of meetings that we have both attended more than once? And then I tested him, this racist, by asking him for directions. When he said that he didn't recognize me, I tested him by asking him for directions so that I created my image that was even poorer than he had before I put that question to him. And he gave me a vague, non-committed and unreliable answer about the direction. I knew Central London as well as he did, or even better. Why I'm saying this? Because he is cited by most of the left in this country, not all of the left, because there are some other left groups, smaller ones, that actually despised him and they despised him because they considered him as a bourgeois kind of left-winger, not a genuine one. But I denounce the racist Paul Foote, and I don't forget the fact that he did make some contribution to original journalism, and he did present this program, What the Papers Say, and his was one of the better ones when compared with the others that presented the program, What the Papers Say. Now, What the Papers Say is a kind of early versions of what we are doing, but we are doing much more comprehensively and uniquely, of course, but that is one of the citable kind of precedents that can be cited when examining the diagnosis of Fleet Street that we are doing. And Paul Foote didn't do anything like what we do, neither in the range or in the breadth or in the kind of universality. Paul Foote confined his analysis to a very kind of careeristic thing so that his image as a left-winger would stand out based on what he was saying about the papers. And he would never say straightforward things against the other journalists that he criticized. He tried to, in his presentations, kind of be humorous and satirical, but they were not really successful because whatever he was doing in the full knowledge that nobody else would be doing the same thing, because he knew that he was a member of the socialist workers that was called International Socialists when he first called me in 1976. So he changed the name after 76 and became SWP. Now the middle letter, workers, is open to editing to give them the correct kind of description, which cannot be aired or broadcast in this program. It is a word that we shall avoid. It's a swear word and a word of abuse, and that is what other left-wing outlets call the SWP. Now, going back to the Times and Michael Gove. Now, Michael Gove is practically owned by Rupert Murdoch. Of course, he owns others as well because of the kind of service he has given them in putting them in power and helping them stay in power. But Gove is a particular kind of tool for Murdoch. And it was evident in the fact that shortly after the racist hate preacher Donald Trump got into the White House, Murdoch took Gove into the White House and did a television interview that looked like Gove was interviewing Trump, but it wasn't. Because behind the scenes that were shown in that video, stood Murdoch in the room, just behind. And it was Murdoch who prompted the whole thing. So what is happening with this piece about Boris Johnson? They would never publish anything critical about Gove, but they would about Johnson. And the purpose behind this is to damage Boris Johnson by exploiting the quote row between Johnson and Cummings now, so that Johnson is significantly damaged in order to pave way for the arrival of Michael Gove as the Prime Minister. That's the purpose behind this one. It's not the kind of service of the truth or service to the truth that the Times is serving or delivering. It's to clear the way for Michael Gove to get in. Whether Gove gets in or not is a different matter. But that's what the Times is doing. And this piece now, this subheading says, Johnson's number 10 plans possibly illegal, says ex-advisor. Claims he tried to stop inquiry into fiancé's friend. Now, these are quite personal things, in addition to being political. Like, for example, when Johnson was openly boasting that London belonged to him, and he didn't care. He did that in response to the words of caution uttered to him while out in the street by Jennifer Arcuri, who he was having a 4-year relationship with. And he wanted to kiss her, or he was kissing her, and she objected. She said, this is public place. And anyone who doesn't know London is the city that has probably the highest number of CCTV cameras in place installed per capita. That is to say, the per head coverage by CCTV in London is higher than anywhere else. That is the data that I'm referring to from some time in the past. It may have changed, but London remains one of the most spied on or spying. Let's say London population remains one of the most spied on populations in the whole world. So instead of saying to her that, okay, he would not kiss her in public, Johnson said, it's my city. I don't care. That is contempt. Not only to the fact that some of the people, like his then still married to Marina Warner, wife whom he was cheating regularly, but the children, because Johnson's children are same age, or his daughter or son, same ages or similar to Jennifer Arcuri's age. So what that reaction shows is that he had contempt for the electors, and he had contempt for the public, and he had contempt for the public standards. Not only was he doing it dishonestly and in supposed secret, but he was brazenly doing it, and he didn't mean. He didn't care. He said it, he didn't care. He said, I don't care. Who gave him the idea that only because he was in that post, that London was his city? It didn't. Nobody gave him that, and nobody could give him that. And he didn't have that right or basis to say that. But he did say that. And the fact that he did say that, and the Times, including the Times, have not denounced him when this fact became known, made known by Jennifer Arcuri speaking to the Mirror Group newspapers. The fact that the Times and other Fleet Street papers haven't adversely commented on that shows their own moral duplicity, their own unethical role and behavior and attitude. And so not only is this piece itself evidence of the Times as unethical, corrupt, and racist, anti-democratic behavior, every single political piece in the Times and every single political decision in the Times is corrupt and as unethical. And Peter Brooks has got his cartoon today neatly capturing one aspect of this Cummings, quote, revelations about Johnson. And he actually has the concept of revelation at the top. Secret lumberjack, identity revealed. And the lumberjack is, of course, there, Cummings, cutting the tree, conservative tree. Now, this is the Peter Brooks cartoon. Where is the Peter Brooks? That's the Peter Brooks. That's the cartoon. And there are writers, columnists that Murdoch hires and pays. And the Times has got a regular feature the Times letters. And these letters, the selection of the letters, look at this. This is obscene. They've got 3 Indians in the letters today, which is completely odd. Not 3 Indians, but the fact is that they are not including any Muslim, really, about the subcontinent and the people that were conscripted to lay down their lives for the sake of British Empire. This is why they've got the letters. But usually there is no Mihir Bose and there is no Shrabani Basu, nor Dr. Zarir Masani. Now, look at the obscenity of referring to Macaulay as Lord Macaulay. They're calling Zarir Masani, historian and biographer of Indira Gandhi, and Lord Macaulay. Anyone watching this program would know that we often have to refer to Macaulay, the racist, imperialist liar. So, on a personal note about Mihir Bose is from a West Bengal kind of background, let's say. And he has exploited the name Bose in a grotesque way, exploiting it by telling the racists in Britain that he is related to Subhash Bose. Now, everything Mihir Bose has done has been opposite to what Subhash Bose would have done. And the fact that he's allowed to even refer to Subhash Bose as one of his ancestors or ancestral relations is itself evidence of the racist policy of the racist supporters of the empire and of the Times. Now, Zarir Masani is making a point about the tombstones in the subcontinent. And Shrabani Basu says that she was a member of the committee, that the Commonwealth War Graves Committee. And Bashir is talking about the Gurkhas and the shocking racism. But Basu, who worked for the Daily Telegraph in the 70s and 80s before he moved on to the BBC or was able to get himself placed to the BBC, published a very long number of items against the Silotis. Can you imagine? He's from West Bengal and he actually grew up in Bombay or Mumbai. And he had a dedicated, obsessive hatred of the Silotis. Now, there is no Siloti that I know who even knows about this, but I took on and I wrote various times. I wrote against his attacks on the Silotis. But of course, what I wrote wasn't published by the Telegraph, but I did write. So, why did he have this thing against the Silotis? This is something that goes back to the type of things that were done in the 1970s, early 70s. As evident in the article, The World Beyond the Curtains, that the Sunday Times magazine published against the Siloti Bangladeshis in Brick Lane and in Whitechapel. Again, nobody noticed this. And I had to read this and translate this and do the campaign that is still ongoing for the rights and the recognition of the Silotis that were denied, and the Silotis were misdescribed and falsely accused of all sorts of things. So was Mihir Bose in effect colluding with some anti-Siloti Bengalis from Bangladesh who might have been involved in the actual preparation of the attack on the Silotis, published in the Sunday Times magazine, 2nd of December 1973, and written by Leslie Garner, Garner. The attack on the Kitten's house in the period July 2012 and since impacted on the ongoing, continuing campaign, research, archiving work that I was carrying out. So when the further details of Mihir Bose and his anti-Siloti propaganda and lies and defamation, collective defamation, are found, we shall update accordingly. So this again goes to be added to the fact-based diagnostic evidence that we have already published in the context of Black Lives Matter, and why Black Lives Matter is not as simple as the slogan may suggest. There is absolutely no solidarity day to day among people of various African and Asian backgrounds in this country, as my updating references to Mihir Bose shows. Because if anything, the Silotis deserve to be recognized and respected for the unique contributions the ordinary people had made in terms of changing the economic position of their individual families. These are people that came in the 60s mainly due to poverty. They didn't come for any other reason but to remove poverty from their families. Many of the families that they came from or they belonged to were in states of hunger and starvation when they came. Remember, 1960s, early 1960s was just after the 1950s. In the 1950s, there were mass hunger because of the flood. And the 1940s, although it didn't happen directly in Sylhet so much as in the Bengal part of the subcontinent, there was the famine in Bengal caused directly by Winston Churchill diverting resources from the subcontinent and plunging, particularly Bengal, into a genocidal starvation and hunger that cost millions of lives. Millions of Bengalis died because of the genocidal decision made by Winston Churchill. Now, this is the man, Johnson is the one that has invented a lot of many persona, many identities. And one of the identities he has cultivated and created is that he is like Churchill. Now, it is not known that Churchill was accused of unethical behavior, illegal behavior, while he was in post as Prime Minister. So, what would Churchill say to Johnson about this kind of disclosure? By Cummings, an admission by the Times and the rest of Fleet Street. Now, there is a quotation in this Times piece which uses within brackets the word pause when quoting Johnson, which suggests that Cummings recorded the conversation. And the Times actually is on to the same issue. The Times says, after the quotation, Cummings did not respond to questions from the Times, that is, about whether he had an audio recording of the exchange. So, I read that before the Times piece was in front of me, that there was clear evidence from the pause that Cummings may have a tape recording. Now, this story is continued on inside pages of the Times, pages 6 and 7. And this page 6 has got a blown up quotation from the blog from Cummings. And it reads, his plans to have donors secretly pay for the renovation were unethical, foolish, possibly illegal, and almost certainly broke the rules on proper disclosure of political donations. Now, none of these references to Cummings as kind of response to Johnson's propaganda yesterday mentions the scandal and crime committed by David Cameron. And this one is the I newspaper, which has the heading, Cummings declares war on Johnson. And it says, Prime Minister's former chief advisor tears into number 10 couple. Dominic Cummings claims that Boris Johnson tried to cancel leak inquiry to avoid upsetting his partner, Kerry Simmons. He attacks Johnson's character. It is sad to see the Prime Minister and his office fall so far below the standards of competence and integrity that the country deserves. Cummings also accuses Prime Minister of unethical and possibly illegal conduct. Now, this is the same source and the same kind of blogs that Cummings has published. And here is the opinion called Letter from the Editor. And this one is the editor of the Eye is called Oliver Duff. And the letter is headed The Revenge of Dominic Cummings, Act 1, Begin. So they are expecting more to come out. And so this one is saying, it is so sad when close friends fall out. Who could have foreseen that hiring Dominic Cummings, a man with the same explosiveness and fertilizing properties as ammonium nitrate, would blow up in Boris Johnson's face? Only 5 months after Mr. Cummings was defenestrated at number 10 Downing Street, he has lurched back to life. The Prime Minister lacks competence and integrity. His former chief advisor claims a quick survey of the number 10 kitchen reveals pot and kettle greeting one another. I mean, this is not the kind of letter from the editor that should have been published. The letter should have said, prosecute both of them. They're criminal liars. And there is a dog that was stolen 18 months ago, has been found, and it has got puppies in tow. Now, that's nothing to do with what's going on between Cummings and Johnson, but that is such a refreshing, welcome news. We should talk about the convictions of 39 postmasters and mistresses later. Now, Katie Bowles, who is deputy political editor of the Spectator magazine, and she says, accusing Cummings of leaking Johnson's texts seems to have misfired on number 10, sparking a damaging response, writes Katie Bowles. And there is a highlight of her piece. The ghost of Dom looms large in the building, says one visitor to number 10. Although there have been a range of leaks in recent months on everything from the Downing Street flat refurbishment to messages to the Saudi prince on football, the latest trouble began when leaked text messages emerged regarding James Dyson. Johnson is seen to have promised the UK entrepreneur he would fix a tax issue for Dyson staff who were working to develop ventilators. Now these are not the truth. These are dressings and glosses to cover the truth, cover up the truth. Cummings is a liar. Cummings is a lawbreaker. Cummings has no morality, ethics whatsoever, as is Johnson. And Katie Bowles is doing a careerist typical Fleet Street thing. Although she is deputy political editor at the Spectator, she is more often busy appearing on the various daily television slots and writing columns like this one. And I've got a piece written by someone called Sarina Sandhu, who sounds like a Hindu name. And it has got a picture of a woman wearing a Muslim headgear, whose this piece is quite rare. As we said about Mihir Bose, hostility and anti-Muslim kind of record at the Telegraph. And also this Iranian-born engineer that was harassed and discriminated against by an Indian employee of Dyson, who this Iranian woman has rarely been granted a tribunal claim against the Dyson company. And as we have been saying, the Black Lives Matter movement is failing because there is no solidarity. Well, quite apart from the fact that there is no solidarity, there is no respect shown to, let's say, the Asian users of utilities and services that are delivered by mainly African and Asian, Caribbean kind of origin persons. And the Daily Mail is continuing the piece or its coverage about Martin Bashir's interview with Diana. And it says, revealed, BBC editor turned up to trick Diana into interview. Now, if this is true, then so much of the BBC and so much of the media is even worse than even we have said. So much of the BBC is directly linked to the brainwashing of people. Because what appears, what goes on air, either on radio or on television, cannot be reversed or kind of deleted or forgotten or removed from public records and public archives. There are some, those that are kind of deleted and removed from access, but those decisions are made not because of ethics or morality on the part of the BBC decision makers. Those are directly linked with the fact that the BBC wants to hide its liability and kind of conceal the evidence. For example, the video containing that panorama program called Your Money, the Mayor and Your Money or something, that reported in 2014 about Luthuraman. Let's see what the actual title of that panorama was. So, in a post by Archant-owned East London idiotizer, they had on the 14th of October 2020 an update. Now, this is very recent, but originally this piece was published in April, 17th of April 2014, and the heading was Luthuraman tried to stop Panorama going ahead, says the BBC reporter. The mayor of Tower Hamlets tried to stop BBC Panorama's report about his time in office from going ahead, according to the chief reporter on the program. Now they call him a veteran investigative journalist. John Ware said, Mayor Luthuraman used public money to have lawyers and a PR company block the report and portray it as racist. John Ware also claims that Luthuraman twisted the truth by saying Panorama was under criminal investigation for racism, when it was the leak of documents by a junior member of Panorama staff to the mayor that was being investigated. John Ware's comments come after government-appointed auditors launched an investigation into allegations of poor financial management and fraud at Tower Hamlets Council on 4th of April. That was 4th of April 2014, and this is April, remember? So we are, in terms of a month, or the name of the month, we are marking the start of that investigation by the government. Writing in another newspaper, John Ware said, 2 weeks ago on Panorama, we scrutinized the way Luthuraman has, well, the has is not appropriate there within brackets, but let's read this again. Writing in another newspaper, Mr. Ware said, 2 weeks ago on Panorama, we scrutinized the way Luthuraman runs this most diverse of boroughs. Well, this is not correct because So this program, The Mayor and Our Money, was broadcast in April 2014. And Panorama says on its website that this episode is not currently available. Let's put this before the camera. Although the video is not there, the introduction to that online is still there. And it reads, Panorama reveals evidence suggesting that under the mayoral system in Tower Hamlets, accountability and transparency have been put into reverse, with the mayor refusing to answer opposition questions about spending decisions involving millions of pounds of public money, and also how he has injected faith into politics. Now that's the kind of version that is larger size. So now this is not the only program that was done on television about Luthorman's abuse of the post and his anti-democratic, and to use the terminology used by Dominic Cummings about Boris Johnson, unethical, illegal. Now the role of the police, the London Metropolitan Police, in covering up this period of 6 calendar years that Luthorman was in post has yet to be legally explained. But then anything to do with the Metropolitan Police is kind of hidden in maze of secrecy. Why? Because the police, the Metropolitan Police, is not accountable. And the Metropolitan Police is not accountable despite the fact that there are various bogus platforms and routes to hold the police accountable. For instance, there is this thing called the Metropolitan Police Service or the Metropolitan Police Authority, of which Sadiq Khan, the incumbent in the post of the mayor, so-called mayor post in London. But Sadiq Khan, as everyone knows, Sadiq Khan, as everyone with the correct interest in and familiarity with the evidence of Sadiq Khan's behavior in post as the mayor since 2016 of the Metropolitan London. Sadiq Khan is a dim individual, ethically almost non-existent, and his horizon is very limited. So how is it that somebody like that is in the post of mayor at the expense of London? The answer is that his rivals are even worse than him. For example, the racist Marcus Fox, who is standing against Sadiq Khan, is being backed by Nigel Farage. I mean, that is it. Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party or whatever are far from guarantees of electoral success for anyone. This is not the 2019, I think, last European election that the UK members took part in. And the success of the Brexit Party at that election was absolutely outstanding. That is impossible, unthinkable now. And that's only 3 years, calendar years. And Nigel Farage, electorally, is not seen as anything like what he hoped he would be when he traveled the length and breadth of England, Little England, boasting that he was the most electorally attractive politician in England. After Brexit getting done, Farage has got done politically. Not only is he a liability, but he's quite persuasively, he's believed by very large and increasing numbers of people as a career criminal who deserves to be prosecuted for multiple crimes. The fact that Farage has not been talked of as a criminal is not because the Fleet Street and others in the media and the public life in the UK are not aware of so much crimes that Farage has been involved in. It's a combination of their own similarity in behavior, similarity to Farage himself, and also it is racism. Because Farage has been the leader in terms of the popularity, the leader of the racist campaign. And Farage has not hidden the fact that he went out of his way to travel to the USA and be repeatedly pictured with Trump along with other members of the cast. And the message that gave of Farage being physically close to the political adventure of Donald Trump's, the political message that was interpreted in Britain and the message that has been interpreted now in the second or third calendar year since the election. The interpretation mainly is that Farage is indeed a racist, a nasty racist, and a complete opportunist careerist. So those kind of views, if you like, are not held by ordinary people who never accepted Farage's lying racist line. It's increasing numbers of the gullibles that are coming to the realization too late that Farage is a conman. His mannerism, his style, his kind of phraseology, his vocabulary, and his record all give telltale signs that he's a conman of the worst kind. We have described him as a conman before, but our description has been in the minority in terms of the numbers of people who have described him in that way. And the reason why ours has been in the minority is not because the contents and the veracity and the evidence base of our description of Farage have been less than rigorous. But in fact, they have been higher than the standard of morality that could be expected. But they have been totally substantiated by the evidence, which doesn't substantiate or justify the role of the mainstream media and police street shielding Farage from attention for his corruption and criminality. That's why they haven't. But they will. Just like they are doing the admissions about Cummings and Johnson, confirming that each of them is a liar and each of them considers the other as a liar. When the Conservative government imposed at the time that John Profumo was a minister of the cabinet, and Profumo was reportedly sleeping with Christine Keeler, who was having an affair with the then Russian naval attaché posted in London. And that was the angle, security angle, that the media actually latched onto. When Profumo was accused of sleeping with this Christian Keeler, there was an almighty moral kind of explosion that forced Profumo to resign. And it was such an explosive public scandal that the Conservative government imposed at the time was forced to appoint this Tom Denning, also known as, quote, Lord, unquote, Denning, to conduct an inquiry into the affairs, Profumo affair. And most of what I know about that scandal is contemporaneous, what I was reading at the time. Even from the memory, I can feel that the accusation by Cummings, as admitted by the Times today, I don't say revealed, but I say admitted, very different concepts. These accusations would have meant that Johnson would be preparing to resign because he has been very persistently discredited. So we shall be talking more about this and other criminality that are being currently hidden by Fleet Street. So we are ending this particular edition at 17:33 hours GMT, 5:34 p.m. in London on Saturday, the 24th of April 2021.